In this video, I'd like to share some tips for writing in-class essays. And these are tips that I share with my own students at the university level, so I hope you find them useful. Some of them are kind of common sense, but a reminder may nevertheless be helpful. So first of all, it's good to prepare properly. And if you have an English exam, let's say, that's what I teach. If you have an English exam, sometimes the perception is, well, I can't really study for that. I just kind of have to know it, and otherwise I can BS my way through. But that's not really the case at the university level. You can prepare because we test you typically on what we have actually taught you in class. So go through your notes, make a list of key themes, try to figure out what did the instructor spend time on, and you can kind of predict often what the exam will actually look like. Come up with some examples, so write out lists for yourselves, scenes, characters, lines, symbols, that kind of thing that you can use, and try to find things that you can use to illustrate multiple points. So if you have an example, think of how it can relate to multiple themes in the text, and then you're going to be prepared to pull out that example and use it however you need to use it, without, of course, abusing it or taking it out of context. Think about key terms that your instructor perhaps wrote on the board, shared on a PowerPoint. If you can use these key terms, the instructor is going to be impressed. And generally, I would say you should imagine your instructor as kind of sitting there with a pen, ready to write check marks in your essay as soon as there's something detailed and specific. Everything like that gets a check mark to kind of say, hey, you know your stuff, right? So the more specific, the better. Think of possible questions, create a sample outline. It only takes 5-10 minutes, and it really shows whether you know the stuff or not. And if you don't have anything to say about a topic, then kind of go through the stories again, or the poems, or whatever you're analyzing, and think of, well, what else can I draw out of them? Now, if you really want your essay to shine, think of a few phrases or lines that you could quote from memory. And that can just be a couple words here or there, something that a character says, but that really shows that you know the text well, that it's kind of in your brain and you're ready to share it. Read the instructions once you get to the exam. I have this all the time. Students don't read carefully, so make sure you highlight things. I've just shown you an example from a class I've taught before. If it says try to cover at least 2 different thinkers, then if you are only writing about one, you're going to lose about half the marks that you could have had, right? So make sure that you spend a bit of time on this, read it carefully, and know what's going on. You really want to start your in-class essay by thinking about the thesis first and get to that as quickly as possible. In-class essays don't tend to need long introductions and conclusions because you don't really score points for them. Think again of that check mark approach. So try to have 2-3 sentences and then get to your thesis quickly so that you can get to the details almost right away. And of course, the shorter the in-class essay, the more this is true. If it's a 50-minute in-class essay, you really don't want to spend more than 5-10 minutes on your introduction. Now, I've given 2 sample thesis statements here. The first one reads, although on the surface, The Secret Garden, a famous children's novel, praises democracy and equality, a closer look reveals that imperialist and patriarchal attitudes persist. What's nice about this kind of approach is that there's a sort of appearance and deeper reality in the thesis statement. And that's not a bad way to kind of structure your thesis for this type of paper. You're kind of saying, hey, at first glance, it looks like this, but if we look more closely, we see something more interesting and more profound. So that's a good strategy to kind of use here. The second one goes, in My Last Duchess, a famous poem, Browning explores how the Duke tries to exert his control through speech, but unwittingly reveals his own insecurities. Notice that this one too has a kind of contrast built in, and a good thesis has tension. Okay, there's some kind of problem that we're trying to solve. In this case, how the text can have the main character appear in multiple ways, and we're bringing this together to try to reconcile these impressions. So don't state something that's perfectly obvious, but state something that has tension, that's provocative, where you can make an actual argument, because arguments get you points. Try to think then also of multiple perspectives. What would somebody on the other side say? What will be arguments for that side? And if you can counter those or maybe incorporate some of them, it's going to be a more complex argument. Make sure that your thesis captures all your points later, but if there's something that you think about later that's a little bit of a digression, you might say, but does fit in, don't stress about it too much. An in-class essay doesn't have to be rigorously connected. You just want that thesis to be on the page as quickly as possible. Don't overthink it. You got to get going quite quickly. Okay, so don't try to, well, if you have 3 or 4 points, you could state them all, but I probably wouldn't. I would just say, this is my main argument, and we'll get to the specifics as we go along. Now, it is good to create an outline. And again, a lot depends on how much time you have for that one essay. If you've got an hour and a half, then it's probably not a bad idea to spend 10 minutes on your outline, because it allows you to list all your examples, kind of figure out what you want to say. And then when you do write, it's going to go a lot more quickly. If you have, let's say, a 50-minute essay, which is pretty typical for my classes, then what I would say is, just have your sample thesis, well, not your sample one, but your thesis, kind of jot it down. Even point form is totally fine. And then try to think of subpoints, but maybe don't list every last example. Those will come back to you as you go through the essay and actually write it. The main thing is the general structure. So in this case, we can see that we have 2 main parts to the essay, examples of controlling speech and then examples of insecurities. And that way we see how the Duke tries to exert control and then unwittingly reveals his own insecurities, right? So we have 2 aspects of his character. Now make sure that you argue your point. So a lot of English essays, what students end up getting sucked into is just summarizing the plot. They start by making an argument about something, and then they start following the plot from that point on to kind of say, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens. And they lose track of this idea that, well, you really have to make an argument about the plot. You should assume that your reader knows the story, so you don't need to summarize the plot, but you can draw the plot into your argument. For example, if you need to give some context in terms of what's happening around the passage that you're talking about. And sometimes you may also turn the plot into an argument. That's especially the case if you're doing something like narratology, which is the study of plot structure itself, in order to make a point about the story. Again, assess conflicting viewpoints, be argumentative, make sure that in each case you're saying something that's more than just a summary of the story. Now, a lot of students, when they come from high school to university, they've been very well trained in spotting themes. Okay, so this story is about death. This story is about fate. This story is about loneliness, right? And sure, that is good. That's a good first step. But spotting the theme by itself doesn't do very much. You have to show how the theme is worked out in the particular piece of literature. The other thing is not everything is a theme, right? So forgiveness is a theme, an epiphany is not. And I see lots of students who are saying, this ironic moment is a theme, or this character is even a theme. So be choosy, I guess, with what you consider a theme, and then take that second step of working it out and really showing how it's developed and perhaps how it relates to other themes, because then we start to get tension and contrast, right? Those fireworks that we talked about earlier. The other thing to avoid is things like versus statements. I see these a lot. It's very typical for high school. Everything is man versus nature, man versus man, and so on. But as I said before, just spotting something doesn't do a whole lot. So if you want to state that versus statement, it's kind of simplistic, right? It's this versus that. But if you want to use it as a starting point, at least spell out how it's dealt with in the text. Details, details, details. You've got to show the prof what you know. Again, think of the checkmark approach and let the examples make your point for you. So try to really express your points through examples. If you look at the strong example here, which rewrites the mediocre one, This one says, in the secret garden, Colin's return to health does not prevent him from being authoritative. When Dickon and Mary wheel him into the garden, he orders the staff to stay away, unless, of course, they are needed. Right? So here we have plot, we have a summary of the plot, but it's being used to make a particular argument about his authoritative manner. In the mediocre one, it simply says, well, he is often very authoritative, but we kind of go, well, when, right? What is the example? So the first one might sound like you're being specific. It's about a character and his attitude, but you haven't shown how this actually shows up in the story. And that is one of the main reasons why students lose points on in-class essays, or they don't gain them. I guess we could look at it that way. It's because they don't have examples. You can talk for hours about a story in general, but it just is not going to score you high on an in-class essay. Notice too that we have quoted a couple of words here towards the end. The final two words of the book are Master Colin. Presumably that's something that was discussed in class, or the person is an astute reader. That works too. And this shows the instructor that you have listened, that you can remember key details from the story. The difference then between this kind of approach, where maybe the instructor said this in class and something original that you contributed, would be the difference between, let's say, an A and an A+, right? Like the really going beyond something that was mentioned in class. In terms of grammar, here's something that you want to watch out for. A lot of students create these really long subjects for their sentences, and it's mostly because they put a whole bunch of ideas together and they use a present participle. So present participles are those verbs that end in ing, like gazing, right, analyzing, that kind of thing. And often what students end up doing is they create this long subject using a present participle, like gazing at Mangan's sister from a distance and adoring her like the Virgin Mary, whew, and then we finally get to the verb is what, etc., etc., etc. So sometimes it's good just to kind of go back and simplify your prose and pick simple subjects like the boy, right? The boy does not truly know, etc. Now, this is not to say that you always have to have only characters or other things as your subjects, but often you can simplify, make your prose less wordy, be concise, and kind of allow the reader to read easily. The other tip I would have for you in this regard is mix up your sentences. Have a longer sentence, then a shorter sentence, then maybe a couple longer ones, but don't make all your sentences super long because it's hard for the reader to breathe and kind of follow your argument. Now, this ain't high school. If you're writing in university, you do not need to praise the author, so you don't have to say, Shakespeare is a fantastic poet, right? A great poet, brilliant writer. It's really not necessary. Your job is to analyze the text, not to praise it, unless the assignment calls for it, which sometimes does happen. You also don't have to draw personal lessons unless it's relevant. So you don't have to be like, well, I learned from Hamlet that I should not procrastinate, or things of that nature. So really focus on explaining the way the text works, what's interesting about it, without necessarily drawing some kind of trite lesson at the end. Learn from mistakes. I see a lot of students who kind of look at their mark, close their booklet, and then it's like, well, I know what I got, but they're not really trying to figure out how to improve. And the best students really learn from their mistakes. They read their instructor's annotations. If they don't understand something, they go to the instructor, they ask, they go to office hours maybe even, and ask for feedback. And all of that's going to make you into a better writer. It's going to build confidence. And yes, most of the time there's a lot of red ink, unless your instructor is really nice and uses green ink or something. And a lot of the comments are negative. That's simply because instructors have limited time and they kind of have to demonstrate why they gave you a mark. So as a result, there's almost always going to be more negative comments than positive. That's for every single student, even if you get an A+. So don't, take that with a grain of salt. Try to focus on the positives. You should always see, is there something positive that I've done here, and then build on that and go see your instructor if you need some extra advice. Last thing here, manage your time. If you have 2 hours for 2 essays, then make sure that you split that time roughly in half. If you have 2 hours, don't leave after 45 minutes. Spend as much time as you can and write as much as you can. Do take a little bit of time at the end to read through things. Give yourself 5 minutes at the end to go back, read out loud, not literally out loud, but out loud in your mind slowly, and try to figure out, are my sentences well formed? Are there any grammatical issues? Try to correct some of these things. Giving yourself a few minutes at the end is time well spent just to make sure that everything reads smoothly. Okay, so much of this was common sense, I'm sure, but I hope you find it helpful and it helps you to improve your in-class writing.